On a frozen Colorado night, a single-dad veteran counted his last $63 bracing for a bank notice that would close his mountain bar in 10 days. Then came a sound. No winter storm could hide 20 roaring motorcycles climbing the icy road. When their leather-clad leader stepped inside and later glimpsed the Marine Corps tattoo across his chest, everything stopped. What followed turned a quiet fight for survival into an unforgettable storm of courage, community, and love. If true stories of second chances, unexpected kindness, and heart-lifting romance speak to you, stay with us. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join a growing family of listeners who believe light can shine even in the coldest winter. Now settle in and let's begin this remarkable journey. The wind screamed across the Colorado ridgeline like a freight train gone feral. Snow hurled itself sideways, striking the weather-worn sign of the Iron Lantern bar until its rusted hinges groaned. Inside, Luke Walker stood alone behind the counter sleeves, rolled to his elbows, a single lamp and the dying glow of the wood stove, casting long amber shadows across the empty room. He pulled a small cash box from beneath the bar and tipped its contents onto the counter. Bills fluttered like tired birds, 2 20s a 10, 3 crumpled ones, and a scatter of coins. He counted twice just to be sure. $63. No matter how he stacked them, the number didn't change. Next to the cash sat the real weight, a thin white envelope with the bank's insignia in cold blue print. Luke unfolded it once more, even though he knew every word. Notice of foreclosure. Amount due $18,000. Deadline 10 days. 10 days. He exhaled through his nose, the sound harsh in the quiet room. 10 days until a stranger from the county came with a clipboard and a lock, and the Iron Lantern, his one fragile claim to a future for himself and his 8-year-old daughter, would be shuttered like it had never mattered. From the back hallway came the soft, even breathing of Ruby. She slept curled under a quilt Luke's late wife had sewn, the one patterned with tiny stars that had faded with every wash. He pictured her hair, a tumble of chestnut curls against the pillow, and for a moment the tightness in his chest loosened. He couldn't let her know. Not tonight. Maybe not ever, if he could find a miracle. Luke set the envelope aside and reached for a rag to polish the bar top that had already been polished clean. The motion calmed him. Slow circles over scarred oak, the smell of lemon oil mingling with wood smoke. Outside, the blizzard's roar grew louder, a relentless percussion that rattled the windows. He checked the clock. 11:47 p.m., too late for customers, too early for sleep. He considered making coffee, but decided against wasting beans. Instead, he stepped to the front door and peered through the frosted glass. Nothing but white chaos. The mountain road beyond was long buried. No one would drive up here now. The Iron Lantern had been his gamble, a place for travelers and hunters, built from sweat and the last of his Marine savings. For a while, summer tourists and bikers, passing through the high country, had kept it alive. But winters here were merciless, and a freak early storm last October had scared off the final wave of guests. What little he earned now came from the occasional snowplow crew, stopping for chili and coffee. Luke rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the old shrapnel scar pull against the movement. Memories of desert deployments flickered, burning heat, the whine of distant shells, but he pushed them aside. Tonight wasn't about the past. It was about keeping a roof over Ruby's head. A soft creak from the hallway turned his head. Ruby padded in wearing flannel pajamas dotted with blue moons rubbing her eyes. "Daddy." "You're still awake." "I am." He crouched to meet her gaze, forcing a smile. "Couldn't sleep. The wind's loud tonight." She yawned, leaning into his shoulder. "It sounds like the mountain is angry." He brushed a curl from her cheek. "Mountains don't get angry, sweetheart. They just talk in winter voices. Her small giggle was a warm crack in the night. "Can I stay with you a little?" He hesitated, then nodded. Together they sat at a corner booth while the stove's last embers glowed. Luke told her a story about a fox that outsmarted a storm, his voice low and steady, until her eyelids drooped again. When she finally slept against his arm, he carried her back to bed, tucking the quilt tight. Back at the counter, he poured himself a splash of water and stared at the ledger. Numbers swam fuel deliveries, overdue supplier bills stacked like firewood. He jotted a few calculations on the margin, searching for hidden dollars that didn't exist. Then Luke froze. At first he thought it was the wind shifting ice off the roof, but the rhythm came again, deeper, like distant drums. He went to the window. Beyond the swirling snow, a faint amber glow pulsed low and steady. His mind cataloged possibilities: snowplow, logging truck, but the sound grew clearer, a rolling growl engines in perfect unison. Motorcycles. He blinked hard. Nobody rode in a blizzard at midnight on a mountain road, unless they had a death wish or a reason. The glow sharpened into beams of light cutting through the whiteout. 1, 2, 5, 20. Headlamps formed a constellation of moving stars, each haloed by snow. The growl deepened until it filled the valley like distant thunder. Luke's pulse kicked. He unlatched the door just enough to hear over the wind. The unmistakable vroom-vroom of heavy bikes climbed the last switchback. Whoever they were coming straight for the Iron Lantern. His first instinct was military assess secure. He turned off the interior lights, except for the stove's dim glow, and checked the shotgun under the bar, not to use, only to know where it was. Ruby's breathing remained steady in the back room. He'd keep it that way. Moments later, the sound surrounded the building. Engines idled low, a mechanical heartbeat under the storm. Through the glass, he glimpsed silhouettes, riders dismounting, thick jackets, dusted white helmets tucked under arms. At their center, a figure strode forward with a leader's certainty, long black coat whipping in the gale. Even at a distance, he caught the flash of silver rings on gloved hands and the confident lift of her chin. The door handle rattled, once firm, but not violent. Then a woman's voice, steady and commanding, cut through the storm. "Is anyone inside? We need shelter. 20 of us." Roads closed behind. Luke exhaled a cloud in the cold air. 20 riders, 20 strangers. On a night when the world had already taken everything but the last $63 and the sleeping child in the next room. He gripped the doorframe, the marine discipline he thought he'd left on foreign sand, tightening every muscle. A choice waited on the threshold: fear or trust retreat, or the stubborn kind of hospitality that had once defined the Iron Lantern. The storm howled, demanding an answer. Luke drew a long breath, squared his shoulders, and opened the door. The blizzard didn't wait for permission. It surged through the doorway as soon as Luke opened it, a fist of icy air that clawed across the Iron Lantern bar. The lantern above the entrance swung violently on its rusted chain, casting erratic bands of orange light over the snow-choked parking lot. In the white chaos beyond, 20 motorcycles stood like iron sentinels, their headlamps cutting narrow tunnels through the storm. Engines throbbed in a low, united rhythm, deep chest shaking, like the distant pulse of artillery. Luke's breath caught. This wasn't a ragtag group of thrill-seekers. This was an organized convoy. The lead rider stepped forward. Even through the driving snow, Luke caught the gleam of metal studs and black leather. A tall woman with a commanding posture unbuckled her helmet and shook free a mane of dark hair, her eyes sharp gray that seemed almost silver in the flickering neon locked on him. "I'm Raven Knox," she called over the wind. "Iron Valkyries. We just rode in from Utah. Roads behind us are sealed with ice. We need shelter, warmth, food, anything. Please." The name stirred something faint in Luke's memory. Iron Valkyries, a renowned all-female biker collective that raised funds for battered women and veterans' causes. But reputation was one thing. Survival in a Colorado blizzard was another. Behind Raven, the rest of the riders dismounted in practiced silence. Their boots crunched over ice-black leather vests, marked with silver insignias, a winged Valkyrie helmet, and the words, "Ride free or fall." Some cradled helmets under their arms. Others adjusted thick gloves and scarves. Their breath steamed in the frigid night, like the exhaust of their machines. Luke's mind flicked through Marine Training Assess Secure Adapt. 20 strangers meant 20 variables. Supplies were thin 2 days of canned goods. At best, a few loaves of bread, a dwindling bag of coffee. And Ruby, sleeping in the back, had to stay safe and warm. Still something steadied in him. Maybe it was the discipline drilled into his bones, or the memory of fellow Marines offering rations to desert villagers. Maybe it was the way Raven's plea cut through the storm, with urgency but no fear. "Come in," Luke said finally, voice deep enough to carry over the wind. "But keep the engines off. Carbon monoxide's no friend tonight." A ripple of relief passed through the group. Raven turned, issuing quick, decisive signals. One by one, the bikers wheeled their machines under the eaves, covering them with tarps and tying knots with numb fingers. Then, like a migrating flock, they filed toward the entrance. The moment they crossed the threshold, the iron lantern changed. Warmth and the scent of pine sap greeted them, but so did an almost sacred hush. Snowflakes melted instantly on their leather jackets, dotting the wooden floor with silver specks. Luke bolted the door against the gale. "Hang your gear near the stove," he instructed. "Boots on the mat, keep the floor dry if you can." Raven's glance swept the room, the scarred oak bar, the dim neon signs advertising beer brands from another decade, the solitary Christmas wreath Ruby had hung on a window pane. "Nice place," she said, voice lower now, but still edged with command. It was once Luke replied. The bikers fanned out, shaking off snow and stamping warmth into their toes. Their vests bore embroidered names, Jet Mox, Firebird, Tally, each telling a story Luke couldn't yet know. Some women looked barely 20. Others carried the seasoned calm of riders who had seen 1,000 highways. Tattoos traced their arms and necks like secret maps. Ruby's soft footsteps startled him. She appeared in the hallway doorway, quilt draped around her shoulders, eyes wide at the sight of so many strangers. Luke crouched beside her. "It's okay, sweetheart. These ladies got caught in the storm. They just need a safe place tonight." A blonde biker with kind eyes and a spiderweb tattoo knelt to Ruby's height. "Hi there, little fox," she said gently. "I'm Jet. We don't bite, promise." Ruby's nervous glance shifted to her father. At his nod, she gave a small wave. The tension in the room softened just a notch, but enough for Luke to notice. Raven removed her gloves and extended a firm, calloused hand. "Thank you," she said. "We'll pay for every crumb we eat, every drop we drink. Name your price." Luke shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip and the faint scar along her knuckles. "Prices stay warm, stay respectful. We'll figure the rest later." A murmur of appreciation passed among the riders. He moved behind the bar, checking supplies. "I've got chili fixings, some beans, bread. Coffee, though, it's rationed." "Beans and bread sound like a feast," someone said, earning a round of chuckles that brightened the room further. Within minutes, the Iron Lantern transformed from a deserted outpost into a bustling refuge. Jackets hung heavy on hooks. Boots steamed near the stove. The air filled with the metallic scent of thawing leather and the earthy aroma of chili simmering on the old iron range. Raven settled at a corner table, eyes never fully leaving Luke. She spoke in low tones to a silver-haired rider named Blaze, who nodded toward the bank envelope Luke had left on the counter without realizing it. He quickly tucked it under the ledger, but Raven had already noticed. "You running this place alone?" she asked when he returned with mugs of steaming coffee. "Mostly." He set the mugs down carefully. "My daughter helps when she can." "That's a lot on one man," Raven said, not unkindly. Luke met her gaze for a long beat, the storm outside hammering the walls. He wasn't ready to share the rest, the debt, the 10-day deadline, but something in her look made him suspect she'd already read more than he'd spoken. The night deepened. Snow battered the windows in relentless sheets, yet inside warmth thickened like a second skin. Laughter sparked here and there as the bikers swapped road stories. Ruby, now fully awake and curious, perched on a stool to watch Luke ladle chili into bowls. Every so often she whispered questions about tattoos or bikes, and the women answered with patience and smiles. Luke felt the oddest sensation, a fragile peace, as though the storm had pushed an unexpected family onto his doorstep. He moved among the tables with quiet efficiency, refilling mugs, adding logs to the fire. Each action, simple, necessary, felt like a small stand against despair. Near midnight, when the last bowls were scraped clean and the wood stove glowed like a captured sun, Raven caught his eye again. There was curiosity there, but also a glint of something he recognized from long-ago patrols, respect for a fellow soldier, even if she didn't yet know the details. Outside, the storm still roared, but inside the Iron Lantern bar, a different kind of weather was forming, a calm born of trust chance and the faint, stubborn warmth of human decency. Luke didn't know that this night, with 20 strangers and a blizzard sealing them in, was only the beginning of something far larger than a rescue from cold. The Iron Lantern bar no longer felt like the solitary outpost Luke Walker had locked up hours earlier. By dawn, it had become a small, living world. Yet under the glow of neon and firelight, tension hung like a live wire, a charged quiet that no amount of chili or coffee could dissolve. Luke stood behind the bar, wiping down a cutting board, his marine-trained senses awake to every detail. The soft creak of old floorboards under biker boots, the faint metallic clink when someone adjusted a belt buckle, the sudden hush when the wind outside dropped low enough to hear the crackle of the stove. 20 riders, 20 wild cards. Their presence pressed against him like the blizzard itself, testing the strength of his resolve. Raven Knox, still wearing the leather jacket now flecked with melted snow, leaned one hip against a corner table. Morning light, thin and icy, began to leak through frosted windows, catching in her dark hair and throwing silver sparks. Her eyes never stopped moving. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, but carried like a command across the room. "Your stockroom," she said. "It's small. How long will your food last?" Luke measured his words. 2 days if we stretch it. Maybe 3. Raven nodded once, as though she'd expected the answer. "Then we'll ration. We've lived lean before." A ripple of agreement moved through the group, nods, soft hums of assent. They trusted her, that much was clear. Still, Luke's fingers hovered near the phone on the back counter. He wasn't sure if the storm had killed the line. He wasn't sure whether calling for help was wise or wasteful. What exactly would he say? That 20 iron-willed bikers had decided to turn his mountain bar into a temporary fortress. One of the younger riders, a freckled woman with a streak of electric blue in her hair, broke the quiet. "Boss, I could check the main road," she offered, voice tinged with the eagerness of someone who preferred action to sitting still. Raven's eyes flashed. No one rides blind in a whiteout. The rider exhaled but obeyed. Discipline rippled outward again. Luke took the moment to step forward. "There's a generator out back," he said. "Old, but it'll keep the stove and a few lights if the power cuts." We'll need to clear the exhaust pipe before it ices shut. I'll handle it when the wind drops. I'll come, Raven said immediately. Something in her tone left no room for polite refusal. Luke gave a short nod. Suit up in 10. I'll gather tools. The other bikers exchanged glances but said nothing. Respect for their leader, and maybe curiosity about this quiet ex-Marine, kept them still. In the side room where the generator squatted under a sheet of rime, the storm hit like a living thing. Snow pelted their backs in wet, hard slaps. Luke crouched by the exhaust pipe, chipping away ice, while Raven braced herself against the wall and scanned the tree line. "You've done this before," she said, over the howl of wind. Luke kept his focus on the wrench. "I've kept things alive in worse places. Military." A pause. "Used to be." Raven tilted her head, sharp eyes narrowing. "Marine." Luke tightened the bolt until it squealed. Something like that. Raven studied him a moment longer but didn't press. "My father served in the Corps," she said finally. "Did 2 tours. Never came home from the second." The wind seemed to hold its breath. Luke met her gaze, the shared understanding wordless and heavy. Then he gave a single nod, Marine to Marine's daughter. By the time they returned inside, a faint camaraderie had grown between them, quiet but unmistakable. Back in the bar, the atmosphere shifted. With the generator humming and coffee reheating, the riders had rearranged furniture into a loose horseshoe around the stove. Ruby sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, listening raptly as a silver-haired biker called Blaze spun stories of desert highways and meteor showers in Arizona. When Luke entered, every head turned slightly, as if gauging the man who just allowed them a measure of safety and warmth. It was Blaze who broke the spell. "You run a fine ship, Captain," she said, lifting her mug in salute. Luke gave a small smile. Just a bar trying to stay open? But the words tasted thin. The foreclosure letter in his pocket felt heavier than the wrench he'd carried. Raven returned to her corner seat and motioned for him to join her. He approached wary. "You didn't have to let us in," she said quietly. "Most people would have bolted the door." Luke shrugged a Marine's economy of movement. Leaving people out in that storm wasn't an option. Raven studied him for a long moment. Not everyone thinks that way. Her words hung between them like a subtle challenge. Luke felt something stir, a faint tug he hadn't allowed himself in years. Part respect, part curiosity. As the day wore on, the blizzard pressed harder against the old building. Wind moaned through the eaves. Snow stacked like fortress walls outside. The riders took turns feeding logs to the stove, their conversation ebbing and swelling in pockets of laughter and silence. Luke moved from table to table with a calm efficiency that reminded Raven of a field medic keeping soldiers steady during a siege. Every action seemed deliberate, refilling mugs before they emptied checking windows for leaks, adjusting the damper on the stove. Yet beneath the rhythm lay an undercurrent, the standoff of strangers forced into trust. No one said it aloud, but each understood they were bound together by weather and circumstance, their fates twined until the mountain released them. Near evening, Ruby wandered to Luke with a sketch pad showing a drawing of the roaring bikes outside. He crouched beside her, pride softening his stern features. "That's beautiful, honey." A ripple of warmth spread through the room. Jet, the biker with the spiderweb tattoo, grinned. "Kid's got an eye for horsepower." Even Raven's cool expression thawed for a heartbeat. By nightfall, the Iron Lantern felt less like a bar and more like a makeshift community. Still, Luke couldn't shake the sense of a line quietly drawn guests and host 20-1. Trust had begun to flicker, but it wasn't yet aflame. When the wind finally eased to a steady moan, Luke stepped to the door and peered outside. The world was an endless white ocean. No plows, no lights. Only the silent presence of 20 powerful bikes, lined like dark sculptures under thickening snow. Raven joined him, her breath a soft cloud. "Looks like we're here for the long haul," she said. Luke's jaw tightened. "Then we make it work." For the first time since the riders arrived, she smiled, small, measured, but real. "You've got grit, Marine." The word landed like a quiet revelation. Luke didn't answer, but deep inside something long dormant stirred a reminder of the man who had once led men through desert storms and come home with more scars than medals. The Iron Lantern Bar was still on the edge of foreclosure. The blizzard still roared in distant valleys. Yet as the door closed against the night, Luke sensed a shift in the air, not just survival, but the beginning of a story no storm could bury. By the time the storm settled into a slow, steady hush, the Iron Lantern Bar had changed from a stranger's refuge into something more intimate. The scent of wood smoke clung to every beam. Frosted windows wore thick coats of white. In the soft orange glow of the stove, 20 riders, women hardened by highways, sat like an unexpected congregation. Luke Walker moved among them with a calm that belied the sleepless night. He carried a tray of steaming mugs. His steps unhurried, his voice low and steady when he asked if anyone needed more coffee. The quiet strength of a Marine still lived in his movements, precise, economical, and strangely comforting. Most of the women noticed. Raven Knox certainly did. She sat near the corner with her elbows on the table, gray eyes following the man who'd opened his door and shared his scarce supplies without a single demand. When he placed a fresh log in the stove, the sparks leapt like small, joyful spirits. The fire crackled, painting his worn green jacket with flashes of copper. For a moment, even the wind outside seemed to pause. "Breakfast," Luke announced simply. "Such as it is." He set down bowls of chili and beans, last night's ingredients, stretched with a few hidden cans from the back room. He added a loaf of bread he'd baked days ago, now warmed and crisped in the oven. One of the bikers, a wiry woman called Mox, tilted her head. "You sure about feeding 20 people with your pantry? That's gotta be the last of it." Luke poured another mug of coffee. "Eat first," he said, voice quiet but firm. "I'll worry about the rest." The room fell into an almost reverent silence as spoons scraped bowls and the warmth of food began to settle into cold bones. The humble feast beans, bread coffee tasted better than any diner meal they could recall. Ruby wandered in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her hair tumbled in coppery curls, and the sight of so many leather-clad strangers might have sent another child running. But Ruby simply blinked, then smiled shyly. "Morning, sweetheart." Luke said, his tone softening. "These are our guests. Ladies, this is Ruby." A chorus of greetings rose soft, "Hey there's," and warm good mornings. One biker with a gentle smile offered Ruby a seat and half of her bread. Ruby climbed onto a stool beside her father and looked around with wide-eyed curiosity. "Did you all ride through the storm?" she asked. "Sure did," Blaze answered with a grin. "Iron Valkyries don't scare easy." Ruby giggled, and the sound lightened something heavy in the room. Raven watched the exchange, her mind working. She had met plenty of men who wore toughness like armor, but Luke's steadiness was different. He didn't perform strength, he embodied it. There was no swagger, no attempt to impress. Only quiet action, feeding, fixing, making sure every stranger was warm. After breakfast, Luke began tending to chores without prompting. He wiped tables, refilled the wood bin, and even mended a loose latch on the front door with a pocket tool. Each task seemed to carry its own silent message. "I will take care of what's in front of me." Raven rose to help, but he waved her off with a small, polite shake of his head. "Guests sit," he said. "Guests help," she countered, but his half-smile disarmed any argument. Near midday, the storm outside slowed to a gentle drift. Through the fogged glass, the bike sat buried under soft mounds of snow, like sleeping beasts. Inside, time stretched easy. The women traded road stories, wild desert nights in Arizona, music festivals. In Texas, dawn rides along Oregon cliffs. Ruby listened, as though each tale was a bedtime story, her eyes bright with wonder. When Luke finally sat down with his own plate of reheated beans, Raven joined him. "You don't talk much about yourself," she said, stirring her coffee. "Not much to tell." Her brow arched. "I doubt that." He took a slow sip, buying time. "Served a while. Got out. Opened this place. Try to raise my daughter right." That all Luke's gaze rested on Ruby, now drawing with a stub of pencil one of the Valkyrie bikes. That's all that matters. Something softened in Raven's face. She thought of her own father, a Marine who'd written letters from overseas in the same spare sentences. She wanted to ask more, but she sensed the line he had drawn and respected it for now. As the day lengthened, small acts of generosity multiplied. Blaze taught Ruby how to fold paper into tiny motorcycles. Jet and Firebird shoveled a path around the generator shed to keep the vents clear. Someone found a deck of cards, and laughter rose from a corner table like warmth itself. Luke joined them only to refill mugs or adjust the stove. Yet his presence anchored the room like a steady bass note under a melody. The Iron Lantern bar, which only hours ago had felt like a fortress against debt and isolation, now pulsed with unexpected life. Still in the quiet moments, worry returned. The foreclosure letter lay hidden under the ledger, its numbers $18,000 and 10 days, burning like an ember he couldn't stamp out. Each kindness he offered, every extra log, every second, helping chip at dwindling supplies. But he could not, would not turn away anyone who needed warmth. Raven seemed to sense this. Catching him alone by the stove, she said, "You keep giving like a man who thinks he'll never run out. That's rare." Luke met her gaze. Running out doesn't excuse doing less. The simplicity of the answer startled her. For a long beat, she only watched him, the orange light throwing a quiet halo around his worn green jacket and the faint scars on his forearms. Outside, the storm began to pick up again, a low, steady drum against the windows. But inside the Iron Lantern, trust was beginning to root in shared meals, in unspoken gratitude, in the quiet leadership of a man who asked for nothing in return. As evening fell, Ruby presented a handful of small sketches she'd made during the day, tiny portraits of each biker, captured with surprising accuracy. One by one, she offered them to the women. "This is for you," she said shyly to Blaze. "So you remember today." Blaze swallowed hard and hugged the drawing as if it were treasure. The room fell silent, many blinking away sudden moisture. Luke stood in the doorway, heart full and aching. He had worried about the last $63 and the debt he couldn't escape. Yet here was his daughter, giving away the only wealth that mattered, her innocent generosity, and in doing so, knitting strangers into something like family. Raven caught his eye across the room and gave a small nod. No words passed, but Luke understood the first real bridge of trust had been built. The wind could rage all it wanted. For tonight, kindness was the strongest thing on the mountain. By the second morning of the storm, the Iron Lantern bar felt less like a chance refuge and more like a hidden world suspended in white. Snow still fell in thick curtains, softening every edge of the surrounding pines. Inside the wood stove hummed, and the air smelled of coffee leather and faint pine smoke. The bikers spoke in low, unhurried voices, their laughter an occasional spark in the muffled calm. But Raven Knox's mind refused to settle. She sat at the corner table with her boots propped on the rung of a chair, nursing a mug of black coffee. Her gray eyes, sharp as winter light on steel, tracked Luke Walker as he moved through the bar. He was as steady as he had been the night they arrived, brewing coffee, patching a draft in the back door, lifting heavy logs with a quiet efficiencies that carried a soldier's precision. Every small movement told a story. Raven had grown up among Marines. She knew the language of discipline when she saw it, the way he kept his back to the wall, the habit of scanning windows before settling into a chair, the smooth economy of his stride, no wasted energy. These were not traits of a simple bar owner. "Something about him doesn't fit," she murmured to Blaze, who sat across from her. Blaze, silver-haired and unflappable, lifted an eyebrow. "Doesn't fit how Raven swirled the coffee, thinking. Most folks who run a mountain bar talk about the next beer shipment, or how the furnace keeps failing. Not about generator vents and rationing like they're running a field camp. And those scars on his forearms, that's shrapnel, not kitchen burns." Blaze chuckled softly. Maybe he's just a careful man. Maybe, Raven said. But doubt lingered. From her seat, she watched Luke kneel beside Ruby, helping the girl lace her winter boots. The affection in his touch was unmistakable, protective, yet gentle. Raven felt an unexpected tug in her chest. Compassion and discipline rarely lived so comfortably in the same man. Her thought slipped to her father, a Marine who had never returned from his second deployment. The way Luke tied Ruby's boots with quick, neat knots mirrored how her father had secured her shoelaces before every childhood hike. The resemblance ached. After breakfast, the riders busied themselves. Some played cards, others oiled chains or checked bike batteries. But Raven remained watchful. When Luke stepped outside to shovel a path to the propane tank, she followed. The air bit at her cheeks. Snow squeaked beneath their boots. Luke noticed her approach but didn't pause. "Need something?" he asked without looking up. "I like to know the man whose roof I'm sleeping under," she said, matching his stride. "And I like to know why he moves like someone who's cleared buildings under fire." Luke's shovel cut a clean arc through the snow. He let the blade rest a moment before answering. "Old habits. Habits don't come from nowhere." He exhaled a cloud in the cold. "Served in the Marines. Long time ago." Raven folded her arms. That explained some of it, but not all. Luke's brown eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. "It's all I care to explain." For a moment, only the whisper of falling snow filled the silence. Raven wasn't used to being deflected. Most people spilled details under her level gaze. But Luke simply returned to work, every movement deliberate. When they re-entered the bar, the warmth hit like a soft wave. Ruby ran up with a drawing of a silver motorcycle, her face bright. Luke crouched to admire it, his expression softening. Raven watched closely, searching for any crack in his armor. All she saw was a father's love, fierce and uncomplicated. Still, the puzzle nagged her. She had met men who hid pasts behind smiles, some dangerous, some simply wounded. Which was Luke? That afternoon, as the storm eased to a quiet snowfall, Raven gathered a few riders to inspect their bikes. The machines were half buried under drifts, chrome dulled by ice. They worked quickly, clearing snow from exhaust pipes and testing batteries. Luke joined them, carrying a bucket of warm sand to melt stubborn patches of ice. His instructions were brief and competent, like a platoon sergeant checking equipment. Raven exchanged a glance with Blaze. Neither needed to say it aloud. Later, while Luke prepared a simple stew from beans and a handful of root vegetables, Raven drifted to the bar. She leaned on the counter, eyes following his hands, as he sliced onions with swift, even strokes. "You run this place alone?" she asked. "Ruby helps when she can," he said without looking up. "No partner, no staff, not anymore." The words were flat, but the pause afterward carried weight. Raven sensed a story loss, maybe grief lurking behind those two syllables. She felt the urge to press but stopped. Something in his posture warned her away, like a door gently closed. Instead, she shifted the subject. "You know, most people would have sent us packing. 20 strangers on loud bikes, storm or not. Luke's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Most people don't live on a mountain where storms kill if you turn folks away. Still, Raven said softly, that was a lot of trust. Trust is how people survive, he replied. The simplicity of the statement struck her. It wasn't bravado, it was belief. As evening fell, the group settled around the stove with mugs of hot cider. Ruby sat cross-legged on the floor, giggling as Jet taught her a biker card game. Blaze recounted a desert ride under a sky full of meteors, the bar filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Raven watched Luke from across the room. He leaned against the bar, arms folded, scanning the gathering with quiet satisfaction. The faint scar along his jaw caught the firelight, a reminder of battles she could only imagine. She felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a mixture of admiration and curiosity that edged toward respect. Yet the mystery of him remained like a locked box. When Luke finally joined them near the fire, Blaze raised a mug. To our host, she said. The quiet man who opened his door. A chorus of toasts followed, warm and sincere. Luke accepted with a modest nod, his eyes drifting to Ruby, who beamed at the attention. Raven's gaze lingered on him long after the laughter faded. He was more than a host, more than a bar owner. The question was, how much more, and why he worked so hard to keep that part hidden. Outside, the blizzard softened into a gentle, endless fall, like feathers from a giant pillow. Inside, unspoken currents deepened. Trust was forming, but so was Raven's determination to understand the quiet Marine who had turned a snowbound night into unexpected sanctuary. She didn't yet know that the answer waited not in words, but beneath a single button of his worn green jacket, a secret etched in ink and scar soon to change everything. Night settled over the mountains like a heavy wool blanket. Outside, the blizzard that had once screamed against the iron lantern bar now murmured in softer tones, but the cold cut deeper than ever. Inside, logs hissed and popped in the stove, sending waves of heat that mingled with the scent of pine sap and slow-cooked beans. Luke Walker stood at the hearth, sleeves rolled to his elbows, carefully stacking new firewood. The room behind him glowed with an almost festive warmth, mugs of steaming cider on tables, soft laughter from bikers swapping road stories, Ruby drawing elaborate swirls of snowflakes and motorcycles on a scrap of paper. Raven Knox watched from her corner seat, eyes narrowed in quiet thought. For 2 days, she had studied this man, his precise movements, his unshakable calm, the scars on his forearms. Her instincts, honed by years of leading the Iron Valkyries across unpredictable highways, told her he was more than a bar owner with a gentle heart. But he had offered only hints served to while old habits. The fire snapped, scattering embers. Luke leaned forward to add another log. As he did, his worn green Marine jacket shifted, and for an instant, the top button of his flannel shirt strained open. A triangle of skin bronzed by sun and scarred by time caught the firelight. Raven's gaze sharpened. Beneath that glimpse of skin, something darker curved in bold lines. Ink. She rose without thinking. The room's laughter dimmed behind her as she crossed the floor boots, silent on the pine boards. Luke didn't notice her approach. His focus stayed on the stove. When she reached him, the warmth of the fire washed over her face. "Careful," she said softly. He turned, surprised but calm. "Thanks. Almost done." A loose ember popped, and instinctively Raven stepped closer. Her hand brushed his shoulder as she reached to steady a log that threatened to roll. The motion was natural, almost protective, until her fingers brushed the soft edge of his shirt collar and felt the rough texture of something beneath. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then, with a gentle tug, meant to free a caught fold of fabric, She lifted the top button and shifted the collar aside. What she saw made her breath catch. Across Luke's left chest, a sprawling tattoo blazed in black and scarlet ink, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. The eagle globe and anchor were rendered with striking artistry. Above the crest, the words Semper Fidelis arched in bold serif script. Below, the faint outline of a combat ribbon seemed almost alive under the flicker of firelight. Raven's hand froze midair. Her gray eyes widened. Every sound in the room seemed to fall away. Cards, mid-shuffle conversations half finished. Only the soft hiss of the fire and the muted breath of the storm outside remained. Luke straightened, realizing too late what had happened. His instinct was to step back, but Raven's stunned expression rooted him in place. The silence spread like a wave. One by one, the Iron Valkyries turned to look. Conversations died. Even Ruby, sensing the shift, lowered her pencil and stared. Raven finally found her voice, but it came out as a whisper. Marine Corps. Luke held her gaze steady and unflinching. Once he said quietly, "A long time ago." Blaze, the silver-haired biker who rarely showed surprise, exhaled a low whistle. "That's no casual tattoo. That's a lifetime." The air in the room changed, charged with something between reverence and awe. The women who had spent years defying stereotypes of fragility now looked at Luke with a new understanding. Raven's mind flashed with images, her father's crisp uniform, the folded flag handed to her family, the long nights, wondering what courage and sacrifice had truly meant. The same emblem now marked the chest of the quiet man who had sheltered them without question. "You never said she managed. You never asked." Luke replied, his voice even but not cold. Raven's throat tightened. "That emblem, it's my father's world. He was a Marine. He never made it home." Something softened in Luke's eyes. He reached to button his shirt, but paused, as though understanding that the truth, finally visible, deserved a moment in the open. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, "and I thank him for his service." A long breath passed through the room, like the collective exhale of 20 riders who suddenly felt they were in the presence of something larger than themselves. The questions came slowly, respectfully. How many tours, Blaze asked. 2 in the Middle East. Luke answered, keeping his tone level. "Recon unit. Hard years. Good men. Why leave it behind?" another biker ventured. Luke's gaze drifted to Ruby, who sat cross-legged with wide, serious eyes. "I had someone who needed me more than the Corps. When my wife passed." He swallowed once, steadying himself. "Ruby was 3. I came home for good." The words landed heavy and gentle all at once. The bikers, many of whom carried scars of their own, lost parents, broken families, roads that stretched into lonely distances, felt the truth settle deep. Raven's eyes softened her earlier suspicion, melting into something else entirely. Respect. Yes. But also connection. "You fought for a country that sometimes forgets its fighters," she said quietly. "And now you're fighting for this place, for her." Luke offered a small nod. The mission just changed. The room slowly found its breath again. Conversations resumed, but at a lower register, no longer the casual chatter of strangers, but the thoughtful sharing of people who had glimpsed one another's deepest truths. Ruby slipped from her stool and padded to her father's side. Without a word, she climbed into his arms. Luke held her close, the Marine emblem still visible, glowing faintly in the firelight, like a quiet vow. Raven looked at him, then at Ruby, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. She thought of the Iron Valkyrie's own mission protecting women on the road, offering shelter to those cast aside. Maybe their paths had crossed tonight for more than mere survival. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. Semper Fidelis. She said the Latin words, always faithful, ringing with new meaning. Luke met her eyes and returned the phrase softly like a promise. The storm outside moaned and shifted, but inside the Iron Lantern bar, something unshakable had formed. Not just trust, kinship. The Marine's tattoo, revealed almost by accident, had become a beacon binding a band of wandering bikers and a quiet father into a single unexpected company. And though no one could name it yet, they all felt the same quiet certainty. This night marked the beginning of a bond that would outlast the snow, the mountain, and even the debt waiting in a bank envelope under the bar. The Iron Lantern bar seemed to breathe differently after the tattoo reveal. It was as if the fire in the stove had grown a second heart, pulsing warmth and quiet respect into every corner. The storm outside had slowed to a ghostly whisper, the world wrapped in deep winter silence, but inside the air vibrated with something new. Kinship. Luke Walker felt it the moment he set another log on the fire. The women no longer regarded him as just a stoic bar owner who had offered them shelter. Their eyes now held something deeper, a recognition forged in shared sacrifice and unspoken vows. He wasn't just Luke anymore. He was Marine Luke, a man who had carried burdens they understood, even without words. Ruby sat cross-legged on a braided rug near the stove, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. She hummed softly while she drew untroubled by the shift in atmosphere. In her child's world, a father's courage was simply part of the air she breathed. Raven Knox remained near the fire as well, her elbows on her knees, eyes reflecting the flicker of flame. All day she had wrestled with quiet suspicion. Now she wrestled with admiration. The emblem she had glimpsed, Eagle Globe and Anchor, was the same one that had adorned her father's casket flag. The connection struck chords she hadn't touched in years. Blaze broke the hush first, her voice rich as a cello. "It's strange," she said, gazing into the fire, how a storm can force strangers into a room and make them feel like family before sunrise. Heads nodded, a few murmured assent. Then Firebird, a younger biker, with a scar slicing through one eyebrow, leaned forward. "Since we're here and nowhere else to go, maybe it's time we tell some stories, the kind we usually leave on the road." The suggestion landed like a spark on dry wood. Conversation swelled. One by one, the Iron Valkyries began to speak their voices, weaving a tapestry of lives marked by courage and loss. Jet the rider with the spiderweb tattoo told of a childhood spent running from an abusive stepfather, and how the first bike she ever rebuilt saved her life, literally carrying her away from danger at 16. Mox described walking out of a violent marriage with nothing but a leather jacket and a wrench, finding a new sisterhood in the Valkyries' desert chapter. As each woman spoke, the others listened with an intensity born of shared roads and scars. No one interrupted. No one judged. The fire cracked in sympathy. Ruby listened too, eyes wide. Sometimes she slipped closer to Luke's side, her small hand brushing his knee, as if to anchor herself in the adult tide of confession. When the circle naturally turned to Luke, he hesitated. He wasn't used to spilling the inner rooms of his life to strangers. Yet something about the moment, the trust, the warm hush, the faint smell of cedar and snow opened a door inside him. "I enlisted the week after my 19th birthday," he began, voice steady but low. "2 tours in the Middle East. Recon unit." The women leaned in not for spectacle, but respect. "There were good days," he continued, "and days I can't explain without showing you ghosts. I lost brothers. I came home with more scars than I ever planned. But the hardest day wasn't overseas. It was here." He paused, eyes softening as they found Ruby. "My wife Anna had a heart condition no one caught in time. She collapsed while I was away on a job. By the time I made it back, Ruby was 3, and my whole world had shifted. I left the Corps. Started this bar because I needed a place that felt alive where people could meet and leave a little stronger than they came. The room stayed utterly quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to listen. Raven's throat tightened. "That's a heavy road, Luke," she said gently. He nodded once. I figured if I couldn't stop the hard things, I could at least build a place where kindness wasn't optional. Something in those words, simple unvarnished, landed deep. Blaze lifted her mug in silent salute. "Semper Fidelis," she said. A quiet chorus followed. "Always faithful," whispered several voices. Ruby, still perched by his side, whispered to him alone. Mom would like this night. Luke pulled her close, his heart aching and full all at once. The fire burned lower, its glow turning from gold to deep ember red. Yet the stories kept flowing like rivers, finally breaking through ice. Tally spoke of leaving a corporate law office to ride full-time, choosing freedom over a corner office. A soft-spoken rider named Wren admitted she once lived in her car for 6 months after aging out of foster care, her motorcycle the only constant companion. Each tale carried a shared theme: resilience and chosen family that braided them closer together. Ruby, shy at first, eventually stood and handed each woman a drawing she had made. Blaze received a silver bike under a shooting star. Mox, a fierce eagle against a sunset. Raven, a black Valkyrie helmet encircled by a ring of flames. "I made them, so you remember tonight," she said, her voice small but clear. One by one, hardened bikers found their eyes stinging. Blaze pressed the paper to her heart. Jet whispered, "No one's ever drawn me before." Raven accepted her sketch with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. "Thank you, little fox," she said, voice rough. "I'll keep this forever." Luke watched with a quiet awe he couldn't quite name. For years he had believed the world beyond these mountains, indifferent, maybe even cruel. Yet here were 20 women strangers yesterday, turning his daughter's drawings into keepsakes, their faces soft with gratitude. It felt like the beginning of something larger than any of them, a community born by chance, but sealed by choice. As midnight approached, the stories slowed to comfortable silences. The riders leaned back in chairs or stretched out on rugs, the crackle of the fire their only soundtrack. Raven remained near Luke, turning her small drawing over in her hands. "You know," she said quietly, "the way you opened your doors. That's not just kindness. That's leadership." Luke shook his head. "Just doing what needed doing." "That's what leaders always say," she replied, a faint smile curving her lips. Their eyes held for a moment. No words, just the subtle recognition of 2 lives shaped by duty and loss. Ruby, half asleep against Luke's shoulder, murmured something about wishing every night felt like this. Luke kissed the top of her head, silently agreeing. Outside, the mountain kept its frozen vigil. Inside, the hearth glowed like a living heart, binding together Marines and bikers, a widowed father and his daughter, in a fellowship that neither distance nor time could easily break. None of them could know how quickly the world outside would shift again, or that by dawn, the sound of engines would rise like thunder through the valley, carrying their night of quiet sharing into a new and astonishing day. The Iron Lantern Bar lay hushed beneath the snow-laden night. Outside, the storm had dwindled to a steady whisper, moonlight faintly silvering the drifts that buried the mountain road. Inside, the fire burned low and deep, filling the room with a gentle red glow. Most of the bikers dozed in chairs or on the braided rug near the stove. Ruby slept, curled on a couch with her sketchbook still in her hands, a faint smile on her face, as if the day's warmth had followed her into dreams. Luke Walker checked the door locks one last time, then paused at the window. The valley lay quiet, the stars briefly visible between slow-moving clouds. For the first time in days, the storm seemed to breathe rather than rage. He let out a long breath of his own feeling, a rare moment of stillness settle over him. Behind him, a chair creaked softly. Raven Knox stood, her dark hair falling loose around her leather collar, gray eyes lit by firelight. "Can't sleep?" Luke asked, turning slightly. "Not with all that's on my mind." Her voice was low-pitched, so as not to wake the others. "You old habit," he said with a faint smile. "I like to walk the perimeter before I turn in." Raven came closer, her boots silent on the worn floorboards. "Marine habits die hard, don't they?" "They keep us alive," Luke replied. For a while they stood shoulder to shoulder near the stove, watching the fire settle into glowing coals. The silence between them wasn't empty. It carried the weight of everything unsaid since she had revealed his tattoo to the group. Finally, Raven spoke. "Luke. Tonight, listening to everyone's stories, I kept thinking about what my father always said. We protect our own even when the world forgets us. The Iron Valkyries started as a riding club. But we've become more than that, a lifeline for women running from violence, a safety net for veterans who come home to nothing. And now," she gestured around the room, "this feels like part of that mission too." Luke studied her profile in the firelight, the resolute jaw, the faint scar near her left temple, the eyes that had seen more highways and heartache than most men he knew. "You've built something remarkable," he said quietly. "Your father would be proud." She looked down, and for a moment the fierce leader softened into a daughter. "I hope so. But I can't shake the thought that we can do more than just ride from one fundraiser to another." Luke tilted his head. "What are you thinking?" Raven's gaze met his steady and luminous, that no one should fight alone. Not a woman fleeing danger, not a Marine trying to keep a roof over his child's head, and not a bar standing like a lighthouse on a frozen mountain. Luke felt the words land like a quiet bell inside him. Raven took a deep breath, then pulled a battered phone from her jacket pocket. "I'm sending a message to every Iron Valkyries chapter west of the Rockies." She tapped quickly, her thumbs moving with a leader's certainty. Luke glimpsed the opening line. "Urgent. Safe house mission. Colorado." "What are you telling them?" he asked. "The truth," she said. "That a Marine and his little girl opened their doors when 100 others would have turned us away. That their bar is running on courage and beans, and that we can help keep its light alive." Luke's instinct was to object, pride stirred like an old wound. He had never asked for charity, not in combat and not in civilian life. But Raven read the hesitation in his eyes and touched his sleeve lightly. "This isn't charity," she said softly. "This is sisterhood and respect. We take care of our own." The words echoing her father's creed and his own corps' motto left no room for refusal. Slowly, Luke nodded. Raven's message lengthened a call for riders to gather at dawn, with supplies, cash, and open hearts. She added the coordinates of the mountain pass and a warning about icy switchbacks. Then, after a final glance at Luke for silent approval, she pressed send. The phone chimed once, twice, then lit up as replies began to stream in. From Nevada. On our way. Wheels turning at 0400. From Wyoming. 3 trucks loaded with gear. See you by sunrise. From Utah. Oregon, New Mexico. Count us in. No one left behind. The screen glowed like a constellation of tiny beacons, each promise carrying the roar of unseen engines across the sleeping west. Luke stared at the flood of messages, awe-replacing pride. That many will really come. Raven's lips curved into a quiet, certain smile. "You don't know the Valkyries yet. When we ride for something that matters, we ride hard, and we ride fast." For a moment they simply stood together, the fire's warmth wrapping around them like a vow. Around the room, other bikers began to stir, drawn by the subtle hum of activity. Blaze rubbed sleep from her eyes and wandered over. "What's the word?" Boss Raven handed her the phone. "We've called the nation." Blaze's silver brows lifted as she read the stream of incoming pledges. "Well, I'll be. Looks like the Iron Valkyries are about to turn this mountain into a festival ground." Low laughter and murmurs of excitement rippled through the waking riders. Mox clapped Jet on the back. "Guess we'd better clear some parking." Luke felt a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't known he was carrying. For months, he had fought the slow grind of debt and isolation, believing rescue was a fairy tale. Now he watched as these women strangers, only yesterday prepared to bring a miracle through snow and darkness. Ruby stirred on the couch, blinking herself awake. "Daddy, what's happening?" Luke knelt beside her, brushing curls from her eyes. "Friends are coming, sweetheart. A lot of friends." Her eyes widened, sleepiness replaced by wonder, like a parade. "Something like that," he said, smiling despite himself. As the fire burned lower, the room filled with quiet industry. Riders checked gear, tightened laces, and plotted parking for dozens of incoming bikes. Someone brewed a fresh pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon upright. Raven moved among her crew with effortless command, offering directions in a low voice. Yet every so often, her gaze drifted to Luke, and when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, gratitude, and the first glimmer of something gentler. Near 2 a.m., when the last preparations were made, and the stove's coals glowed like quiet stars, Raven returned to Luke's side. "They'll start arriving not long after sunrise," she said. "It'll sound like thunder in the valley." Luke looked toward the sleeping mountains beyond the window. "Thunder you'll welcome." Raven extended her hand. "Then it's set. Tonight we made a promise to each other and to the road." He clasped her hand firmly. "Semper Fidelis," he said, and for the first time since leaving the Corps, the words felt less like a memory and more like a living vow. The Iron Lantern Bar, once a lonely outpost of struggle, now pulsed like the heart of a growing constellation. Engines were already firing hundreds of miles away, carrying with them food cache and the certainty of solidarity. As Luke watched the embers settle, he realized the miracle wasn't the money that might come, but the community already born in the quiet hours of this storm. Above the roof, the winter sky deepened toward dawn. Somewhere in the darkness, 1,000 unseen wheels began to roll. Before dawn, the mountains held their breath. The blizzard had eased into a pale stillness, leaving the world coated in a heavy silence. Snowdrifts stood like frozen waves. The Iron Lantern Bar, its windows glowing faintly. Amber felt like a lone ship, moored in a sea of white. Luke Walker woke before his alarm-old Marine habit and moved through the quiet bar. Every hinge and floorboard seemed to know its duty, creaking softly as if to greet him. Ruby slept soundly on the couch beneath her mother's star quilt, her face peaceful. He paused to tuck the blanket closer around her shoulders. From the back hallway came the low rumble of conversation. Raven, Knox, and Blaze were already up, leaning over a map spread across the counter, the light from a single lamp pooling on their faces. "They're on the move," Raven said as Luke approached. Her phone screen glowed with fresh messages. Wyoming Pack left at 3:45. Oregon Group hit the interstate an hour ago. Nevada Chapter's convoy is 10 minutes from the Colorado border. Blaze grinned, silver hair catching the light. "Looks like the sisters took your midnight call seriously, boss." Raven gave a small, satisfied nod. "They'll be here before the sun clears the ridge." Luke set a pot of coffee to brew the smell of dark roast, quickly mingling with wood smoke. "How many, hard to say," Raven answered. "But at least 100 bikes. maybe more with the supply trucks. Luke's eyebrows lifted. That's an army. Not an army, Raven corrected, her voice warm with conviction. A family. The first hint of dawn painted the eastern horizon in a cold lavender hue. The iron lantern stood ready, generator checked, extra wood, stacked paths, cleared as best as possible. Riders from Raven's core group moved with quiet efficiency, clearing snow off the parking area, setting out spare blankets, double-checking fuel for the stove. Ruby woke to the aroma of fresh bread and the low thrum of anticipation. She climbed onto a stool beside her father, eyes bright. "Daddy, is it today?" "It's today," Luke said, handing her a warm biscuit. She bounced slightly, a spark of wonder lighting her face. "Will it really sound like thunder?" Luke smiled, stronger than any thunder you've ever heard. As if on cue, a distant vibration stirred the mountain air. At first it was subtle, like the faint tremor before a summer storm. Then it deepened, rolling through the valley with a growing resonance that made the windows hum in their frames. The Iron Valkyries were coming. The riders stepped outside despite the biting cold. The early light caught the gleam of leather and chrome. Luke joined them, Ruby perched on his hip, her breath clouding in excitement. Far down the switchback road, the horizon pulsed with moving lights. Headlamps flared and faded in a slow rhythm like a constellation sliding across the snowy forest. The sound intensified, a low, rolling growl that merged with the mountain's own heartbeat. "They're here," Raven said, her voice carrying a note of reverence. Within minutes, the distant lights resolved into a river of motorcycles and support trucks. They wound up the mountain road in precise formation, engines roaring in unison until the very ground seemed to tremble. The spectacle was otherworldly, a steel symphony of over 100 bikes chrome, flashing against the dawn. Ruby gasped. "It's like a parade for heroes." Luke tightened his arm around her eyes, stinging in the cold air, or maybe in quiet awe. That's exactly what it is. The first wave crested the final bend and spilled into the Iron Lantern's lot tires, crunching on packed snow. Bikes lined up with soldierly discipline exhaust, steaming into the pink morning sky. Riders dismounted their jackets, heavy with frost and purpose. Raven stepped forward, her breath visible in the chill. "Welcome, sisters," she called. Her voice, sharp and commanding, carried above the engines. A cheer erupted, dozens of voices blending with the roar of throttles. Inside the bar, warmth and noise swelled to a joyous chaos. The newcomers brought boxes of food bags of coffee tools, blankets, and envelopes sealed with rubber bands. Some set to work, clearing more space. Others stacked supplies in neat rows. The air filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the low music of conversation. Luke moved among them, shaking hands, offering thanks he could barely put into words. Each handshake carried the weight of something more than gratitude, recognition of shared struggle of lives built on grit and service. One veteran Valkyrie with streaks of white in her black braid clasped Luke's shoulder. "Your reputation rides fast, Marine," she said, pressing a sealed envelope into his palm. "From the Nevada chapter, with respect." Another rider placed a pair of vintage Marine gloves on the counter, the leather worn but lovingly polished. "These kept my brother's hands warm on winter convoys," she said quietly. "They belong with you now." Luke's throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," she replied. Raven moved through the crowd like a conductor guiding an orchestra. She directed parking-assigned crews to clear more snow and ensured food and fuel were distributed. Yet her eyes found Luke again and again, each glance carrying an unspoken message. This is what faith in strangers can build. By late morning, the Iron Lantern pulsed with life. Children of the mountain farmers, A mail driver stranded by the storm, a park ranger wandered in to witness the spectacle. They were greeted with mugs of coffee and smiles, as if they too had been Valkyries all along. Luke stood near the bar with Ruby on his hip, taking it all in. Yesterday he had feared the silence of foreclosure. Today, the walls vibrated with friendship and possibility. Blaze approached with a grin. "Looks like the whole West decided to pay you back for opening a door." Luke shook his head slowly. "This is beyond anything I imagined." Raven joined them, cheeks flushed from the cold and the excitement. "This is what happens when good people call to good people," she said simply. Ruby looked from her father to Raven. "Does this mean the bar is safe now?" Luke hesitated, the old instinct for caution tugging at him, but seeing the endless line of bikes outside and the mountain of supplies indoors, he allowed himself a rare certainty. "It means hope just got a lot bigger," he said, kissing her forehead. The room erupted in another cheer as a final wave of bikes rolled in their engines, harmonizing into a roaring crescendo that made every window sing. For Luke, the sound was more than noise. It was a promise that the light of the Iron Lantern bar would not only stay on, but shine brighter than ever. He caught Raven's eye across the crowd. She raised a gloved hand in salute, and he returned it. Marine to Marine's daughter, man to woman, ally to ally. The dawn thunder outside had become a living testament. Inside 100 hearts, 100 engines, all beating to the same rhythm of courage and generosity. And Luke knew with a quiet certainty, as deep as the mountain's roots, that this was only the beginning of what their newfound family could build. By late morning, the Iron Lantern bar looked nothing like the quiet refuge Luke Walker had known only days earlier. What had been a single-room mountain tavern was now a vibrant outpost, alive with the deep hum of engines and the music of generosity. Outside, the sun finally broke through thin clouds scattering diamonds of light across hundreds of bike mirrors and chrome pipes. Inside the once scarce pantry overflowed with boxes of coffee sacks, of beans, jugs of milk, cartons of eggs, and more than enough firewood to last the winter. Luke stood near the bar's front window, Ruby perched on his hip, both of them silently absorbing the scene. Through the frosted glass, they could see the steady arrival of more riders, bikes glinting in fresh light boots, crunching in perfect rhythm. It was a cavalry of kindness. Raven Knox stepped beside him, her black leather jacket flecked with melting snow. She carried herself with the quiet pride of a mission fulfilled. "We stopped counting after 100 bikes," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "Might be closer to 150 now. And 2 supply trucks." Luke gave a soft laugh, half disbelief, half gratitude. "I don't think this old mountain has seen anything like it." Raven's lips curved. "Neither have I." Inside, the bar tables were pushed together to form long communal benches. Riders in jackets embroidered with Valkyrie wings served steaming coffee and passed baskets of freshly baked bread. Blaze orchestrated the kitchen like a seasoned quartermaster, while Jet and Firebird arranged the incoming donations into neat towers against the wall. Everywhere Luke looked, needs were met before he could voice them. Someone reinforced the back door's draft seal. Another crew shoveled a wide parking lane for late arrivals. A veteran mechanic crouched beside the generator, fine-tuning it without being asked. Luke felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see a tall woman with weathered features and a commanding presence. Her jacket bore a small Marine Corps insignia beneath the Valkyrie crest. "Name's Clara," she said. "Served in the Corps back in '88. Heard the call and rode out from Idaho last night." Luke clasped her hand firmly. "Semper Fi." "Always faithful," Clara replied with a warm grin. Then she reached into her pack and placed a small, weighty object on the counter, a pair of vintage Marine gloves, the leather softened by years, but lovingly oiled. These belonged to my husband. They kept him safe on convoys through cold nights. I think they're meant for you now." Luke's throat tightened. I can't accept this." "You already have," Clara said gently. "You earned them long before today." Raven appeared at his side, holding a thick envelope sealed with a Crimson Valkyrie sticker. "And this," she said, her eyes locking with his, "comes from every chapter represented here." Luke accepted the envelope with careful hands. When he opened it, stacks of bills filled the space, neat thick bundles of cash. Raven spoke clearly enough for those gathered to hear. $92,000, counted and contributed overnight, enough to pay off the bank and give the Iron Lantern breathing room for a new beginning. For a moment, Luke couldn't speak. The numbers blurred as his eyes stung. He felt Ruby's small arms tighten around his neck. "Daddy, is that enough to save our home?" He managed a nod. "Yes, sweetheart. More than enough." A cheer erupted, swelling through the room like a sudden sunrise. The sound of dozens of women cheering, boots stamping, and mugs clinking filled the bar until even the windows seemed to vibrate with joy. When the noise softened, Raven raised her voice again. "This isn't just a rescue mission. This is an investment. We believe in what you've built here, Luke, more than a bar, a haven. From this day forward, the Iron Lantern will serve as an official stop on every Iron Valkyrie's route in the West. A place where women, riders, veterans, and travelers know they'll find warmth and respect." Blaze stepped forward, a wide grin splitting her face. "We're calling it the Iron Valkyrie Haven, a home for the brave." Applause and cheers followed. Someone began a slow rhythmic tap on the bar that others quickly joined, creating a heartbeat of unity that filled the room. Luke felt words gather in his chest like a tide, but for a moment he could only hold Ruby closer and look around at the sea of determined faces. Finally, he found his voice. "You rode through a blizzard for strangers," he said, each word steady. "You turned a night of desperation into a morning of hope. I don't have speeches for something like this. But I can promise you, this place will stay what it was meant to be, a light for anyone lost in the storm." A quiet, powerful stillness followed. Then Clara lifted her mug high. "To the light," she called. To the light, the room answered, voices strong enough to shake the rafters. The rest of the day unfolded like a celebration written in steel and laughter. Outside, bikes gleamed under the new sun, while riders formed a line to help shovel and sand the mountain road. Inside, meals flowed from the kitchen, hearty stews, fresh bread, and endless coffee. Ruby darted among the tables, handing out new sketches of arriving riders, each drawing received like a priceless gift. Several bikers pulled Luke aside to offer professional help, a retired accountant to guide finance as a contractor to reinforce the roof before the next storm, and a mechanic who promised regular checkups on the generator and heating system. Raven stayed near, a steady presence. At one point, she led Luke outside to where the first group of riders had gathered around the newly cleared front porch. Together, they looked over the valley, now glittering in white and gold. "You opened your door and trusted strangers," she said quietly. "This," she gestured to the endless rows of bikes, and the joyful commotion inside is what trust can build. Luke met her gaze. "I thought I'd have to fight this battle alone. Turns out I only needed to open the door." The corner of her mouth lifted. "That's the hardest part for most people." They stood side by side, letting the cold morning air bite their cheeks, and for a moment, the mountain seemed to belong to them alone. As evening approached, the sky blushed with the pinks and purples of an alpine sunset. The last of the visiting riders prepared for the journey back down the mountain, promising to return with friends and to spread the word about the Iron Valkyrie Haven. Luke watched them go with Ruby on his shoulders, his heart full, in a way he hadn't known for years. He turned to find Raven beside him, her expression soft but unreadable. Today changed everything he said, simply. It did. She agreed, her voice carrying both pride and something gentler, harder to name. For Luke, the $92,000 in the safe and the marine gloves on the bar were proof of salvation. But deeper than that was a truth he hadn't dared believe until now. Miracles arrive not only through struggle, but through people willing to ride through darkness for each other. The Iron Lantern sign flickered to life as night fell, its new lettering Iron Valkyrie Haven already affixed by the hands of grateful riders. Its neon glow shone against the snow like a steadfast promise. Luke tightened his arm around Ruby and glanced at Raven, feeling something unexpected and welcome take root, a quiet conviction that this was only the first chapter of a larger shared future. 6 months later, spring sunlight spilled over the high Colorado Valley like liquid gold. Snow still clung to the peaks, but the mountain road that had once been buried in silence now pulsed with life. From a distance, travelers could see a new sign glowing against the rugged sky, Iron Valkyrie Haven, a home for the brave. The Iron Lantern Bar was no longer a lonely outpost. Where icy winds had once rattled empty windows, a cheerful bustle now filled every corner. Chrome motorcycles of every color lined the gravel lot in neat rows, their tanks reflecting the morning sun. Fresh pine planters framed the porch, where hand-painted wooden benches invited riders and hikers to stop and stay a while. Luke Walker stepped outside onto the wide new deck, breathing in the mingled scents of pine needles and strong coffee. The air hummed with the low music of arriving bikes and the laughter of guests. 6 months ago, he had stood here wondering how to save a failing bar with only $63 and 10 days left. Now, with the mortgage paid, the pantry full, and a growing community around him, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself in yearsies. Ruby bounded across the porch, her copper curls flying, a sketchbook tucked under one arm. Daddy Aunt Jet says she can teach me how to ride her mini bike today. Can I? Luke crouched to meet her bright eyes. Helmet first, he said with mock sternness. And lessons only in the parking circle. She saluted like a tiny Marine. Yes, sir. Then she dashed toward the waiting biker, already chatting about custom paint colors for her dream bike. Watching her, Luke's heart swelled. Ruby's world had once been small school, the quiet bar, and the long mountain winters. Now she had aunts in leather jackets and mentors who taught her to draw engines and trace mountain trails. The Iron Valkyries had become her extended family, every bit as real as blood. Inside the bar was a kaleidoscope of cheerful chaos. Morning sunlight streamed through new picture windows, illuminating tables, crowded with travelers, long-haul truckers, young couples on hiking trips, veterans who came to share stories and find fellowship. The old neon beer sign still hung over the counter, but next to it gleamed a polished brass plaque that read, "Dedicated to Luke and Ruby Walker," whose open door lit the way for a new family of the road. The $92,000 gift from that unforgettable morning had done more than rescue the bar from foreclosure. It funded a kitchen expansion, solar panels on the roof, and a corner reading nook stocked with books about travel courage and healing. More important, it built a tradition. Every month, riders from across the West returned for Haven nights, bringing food donations and helping with repairs. What began as an emergency had become a living rhythm of generosity. Luke moved through the crowd with easy familiarity, shaking hands and exchanging quiet jokes. People greeted him not only as the bar's owner, but as Captain Luke, the man whose quiet courage had turned a blizzard into a legend. Blaze waved him over from the coffee station. "Morning, Captain. We've got a group from Oregon coming through around noon. Told them the first round of chilies on you." Luke chuckled. As long as they bring stories to pay for it, they will. Blaze promised, her silver hair catching the light like steel spun into silk. Near midday, Raven Knox arrived from a supply run, her black Valkyrie jacket dusted with mountain pollen instead of snow. She parked her bike with the ease of a seasoned rider and climbed the porch steps 2 at a time. Luke met her with a smile that felt both new and long familiar. Welcome home. Home. The words slipped out naturally, and neither of them flinched. Raven returned the smile, her gray eyes bright. It smells like fresh bread, and freedom in there, she said. They walked inside together, weaving through the friendly noise. Riders greeted Raven with hugs and quick updates, a new chapter opening in Nevada, a successful fundraiser for women veterans in Utah. She listened with the quiet authority of a leader, whose influence had only grown since that winter storm. When they reached the far corner of the bar, now a cozy nook with wide mountain views, Luke poured 2 mugs of coffee and joined her at a table polished smooth by countless stories. For a moment they simply sat, the din of voices around them like warm background music. Raven traced a finger over the grain of the wood. 6 months, she said softly. Feels like 6 years, and 6 minutes all at once. Luke nodded. Sometimes I still wake expecting to hear only wind and emptiness. Then I remember. The thunder came, and it never really left. She smiled at that. The midnight oath is still alive. Every time a Valkyrie chapter rides in, I think of that night. How you stood at the door, no hesitation when 20 strangers needed shelter. He met her gaze. And how you sent a message that changed everything. The air between them warmed with unspoken memories, the tattoo revealed in firelight, the flood of bikes at dawn, the way their lives had braided together without either planning it. As afternoon softened into evening, the bar's energy shifted toward celebration. A group of traveling musicians tuned guitars near the hearth. Ruby cheeks flushed from many bike adventures, darted from table to table, distributing fresh sketches. Today's masterpiece was a panorama of 100 bikes beneath a mountain sunrise. Riders pinned them to jackets and helmets, like medals. Blaze called for a toast. To Luke and Ruby, who proved that one open door can change a continent of hearts. The crowd roared approval, mugs lifted high. Luke felt heat rise to his face and stood clearing his throat. You all turned a place on the brink into a haven that feeds souls as well as stomachs. If this bar stands for anything, it's proof that kindness is stronger than storms. The light you see in that sign outside it will always stay on. For travelers, for fighters, for anyone who needs a family. Applause thundered until the rafters hummed. Raven rose beside him, her voice sure and bright. And the Iron Valkyries will ride here for generations, not because we saved a bar, but because we found a brother and a mission that will outlive all of us. The room answered with cheers so full of love they seemed to lift the very roof. Later, as twilight draped the valley in purple and gold, Luke stepped outside with Raven and Ruby. Together, they watched the neon sign ignite against the darkening sky. Its words, Iron Valkyrie Haven, a home for the brave, glowed like a promise, visible for miles. Ruby leaned against her father. It's like the stars came down to stay. Luke kissed the top of her head. That's because everyone here brought a piece of light with them. Raven slipped her gloved hand into Luke's, a quiet gesture that spoke of shared journeys and new beginnings. For the first time since losing Anna, Luke allowed his heart to imagine something beyond survival, companionship, partnership, even love. Above them, the first real stars winked through the twilight, joining the steady shine of the Haven's sign. The mountain that once felt like an isolated fortress now seemed like the warm center of a vast and welcoming world. Luke drew a slow, grateful breath and whispered more to himself than to anyone else. The light will always stay on. Raven heard him and smiled, tightening her hand around his. Always, she said. The camera of memory might have pulled back then, over the glowing sign, over the endless constellation of parked bikes, over the family born of storm and courage, until the Iron Valkyrie Haven became a small but brilliant beacon in the great dark of the Rockies. What had begun as a night of desperation had become a permanent testimony to the power of kindness, the endurance of love, and the unbreakable strength of community. And so, beneath a sky alive with stars and chrome reflections, the Haven's lights burned steadily, on welcoming every rider, every wanderer, every soul who needed proof that goodness can outlast any winter. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of this journey touched your heart the most? Share a few words in the comments so we can keep building this warm, caring community together. If stories of hope, kindness, and second chances inspire you, please subscribe to our channel so you'll never miss the next heartfelt tale. Your support helps keep these lights of compassion shining. From all of us here, thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence and encouragement mean more than words can say. Until the next story, may your days be filled with warmth and gentle miracles.